In the sun-soaked hills of Beverly Hills, where luxury was a way of life and the air seemed perfumed with the scent of success, stood a mansion that dwarfed all others. Its pristine white facade and perfectly manicured lawns were a bold declaration of the Harrington family's wealth and influence. Yet behind those gilded walls, a storm was brewing, one that no fortune could contain. Before we continue, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. John Harrington, the patriarch of the family, was a man whose very essence seemed to be carved from the marble of ambition. His steel-gray eyes, always scanning the horizon for the next big opportunity, rarely softened, even in the presence of his wife and son. John had clawed his way up from humble beginnings, fueled by an insatiable hunger for success that had propelled him to the pinnacle of the business world. Now, at the age of 45, he stood atop an empire of his own making, a self-made millionaire whose name was whispered with reverence in boardrooms across the country. But success, John would learn, was a fickle mistress, and the price of his achievements was steeper than he could have ever imagined. Lily Harrington, once a vibrant and passionate woman, now moved through the expansive rooms of their mansion like a ghost, her footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness that surrounded her. At 42, she was still strikingly beautiful, with flowing chestnut hair and eyes that hinted at a depth of emotion rarely allowed to surface. Lily had once dreamed of a life filled with love and laughter, of a home bustling with the joyous chaos of family. Instead, she found herself trapped in a gilded cage, her days marked by an endless parade of social engagements and charity galas that did little to fill the void in her heart. As she stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the sprawling city below, Lily couldn't help but wonder where it had all gone wrong. When had the warmth of John's love been replaced by the cold comfort of his bank accounts? When had their conversations shifted from dreams and aspirations to stock portfolios and investment strategies? The weight of her loneliness pressed down upon her, a constant companion in this world of excess and emptiness. But it was their son Ethan who bore the heaviest burden of all. At just 10 years old, Ethan Harrington was a boy adrift in a sea of luxury, starving for the one thing money couldn't buy: his parents' attention and love. His small frame seemed to shrink even further as he wandered the cavernous hallways of their home, his footsteps muffled by plush carpets that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. Ethan's room was a child's paradise, filled with every toy and gadget a boy could dream of. The latest gaming consoles sat untouched beside stacks of books that had never been opened. A miniature racing car track wound its way around the perimeter, gathering dust. These were not gifts given out of love or understanding, but rather attempts to fill a void with material possessions, a strategy John applied to all aspects of his life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ethan sat cross-legged on his bed, clutching a worn teddy bear, the one item in his room that truly meant something to him. It had been a gift from his grandmother before she passed away, and it was the only thing that made him feel less alone in this vast, empty house. "I wish you could talk," Ethan whispered to the bear, his voice barely audible in the stillness of his room. "Maybe then I'd have someone to really talk to." Downstairs, the sound of the front door opening and closing echoed through the house. Ethan's heart leapt for a moment, hope flaring in his chest. Maybe today would be different. Maybe today his father would come up to see him, to ask about his day, to just be there. But as the minutes ticked by, that hope faded, replaced by the familiar ache of disappointment. The sound of his father's study door closing with a soft click was like a physical blow, another reminder of the invisible barrier that stood between them. Ethan slid off his bed, padding softly across the room to his window. From here, he could see the garden stretching out below, a meticulously maintained oasis of green in the arid California landscape. And there, moving among the plants with quiet purpose, was Miguel, the family's gardener. Miguel was a constant presence in Ethan's life, one of the few people who seemed to actually see him. His weathered face always broke into a warm smile when he spotted Ethan, and he never failed to wave or offer a kind word. To Ethan, Miguel was a lifeline to a world beyond the cold, sterile perfection of the Harrington household. As Ethan watched, Miguel knelt down beside a flower bed, his hands gently coaxing life from the earth. There was something in the way he worked, a sense of peace and purpose that fascinated the young boy. It was so different from the frantic energy that surrounded his father, the constant rush to acquire more, to be more. A soft knock at his door startled Ethan from his reverie. "Ethan, honey?" His mother's voice drifted through the wood, tentative and unsure. "Dinner's ready." Ethan sighed, turning away from the window. "Coming, Mom," he called back, his voice lacking any real enthusiasm. Dinner in the Harrington household was rarely a family affair. More often than not, it was Ethan and his mother sitting at opposite ends of a table far too large for two, the silence between them broken only by the clink of silverware against fine china. As he made his way down the sweeping staircase, Ethan's gaze was drawn to the massive portrait that dominated the foyer. It depicted the Harrington family, John standing tall and proud, Lily seated beside him with a practiced smile, and Ethan, looking small and out of place, perched on the arm of his mother's chair. The portrait was meant to showcase their success, their perfect family, but to Ethan, it was a painful reminder of the disconnect between appearance and reality. The dining room was a study in opulence, with its crystal chandelier casting a soft glow over the polished mahogany table. Lily was already seated, her posture perfect, a glass of red wine at her fingertips. She managed a small smile as Ethan entered, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "How was your day, sweetheart?" she asked as Ethan climbed into his chair, the same question she asked every night. Ethan shrugged, pushing his food around his plate. "Fine," he mumbled, the same answer he gave every night. He wanted to tell her about the loneliness that gnawed at him, about the way he felt invisible in his own home. But the words stuck in his throat, held back by years of learned indifference. Lily opened her mouth as if to say more, but at that moment, the dining room door swung open, and John Harrington strode in, his attention fixed on the smartphone in his hand. "John," Lily said, a note of hope in her voice. "I didn't think you'd be joining us." John glanced up as if surprised to find himself in the dining room. "Just grabbing a quick bite," he said, his tone distracted. "Big deal closing tomorrow. Need to review some numbers." Ethan watched as his father piled some food onto a plate, barely acknowledging his presence. He wanted to speak up, to say something, anything, that might capture his father's attention, even for a moment. But as always, the words failed him, and he remained silent, invisible. As John turned to leave, plate in hand, Lily's voice cut through the silence. "John, please, stay. Eat with us. It's been weeks since we've had a family dinner." For a moment, John hesitated, his gaze flickering between his wife and son. Something akin to guilt flashed across his face, quickly replaced by his usual mask of determination. "I'm sorry, Lily. This deal, it's important. Maybe next time." And with that, he was gone, leaving behind a wake of disappointment and unspoken words. Lily's shoulders slumped, the hope draining from her face. She turned to Ethan, forcing a smile that didn't quite hide the pain in her eyes. "Well, looks like it's just you and me again, sweetheart. Tell me about school. Did anything interesting happen today?" Ethan wanted to comfort his mother, to erase the sadness that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. But he was just a boy, ill-equipped to navigate the complex emotions that swirled around him. So he did what he always did. He retreated into himself, offering only the barest of responses. "School was okay," he said quietly. "We learned about photosynthesis in science class." Lily nodded, latching onto this small piece of information like a lifeline. "That's fascinating. Ethan, plants are amazing, aren't they? The way they can create their own food from sunlight, it's like magic." For a brief moment, Ethan's thoughts drifted to Miguel and his garden. He wondered if Miguel knew about photosynthesis, if he understood the science behind the life he nurtured every day. Somehow Ethan suspected that Miguel's understanding of plants went beyond textbook knowledge. It was something felt, something lived. As the meal progressed in stilted silence, broken only by Lily's occasional attempts at conversation, Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of absence pressing down on him. It wasn't just his father's physical absence from the table, but the emotional void that seemed to permeate every corner of their lives. Later that night, as Ethan lay in his bed, staring up at the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to his ceiling, he made a wish. Not for more toys, or games, or any of the material things that filled his room. No, Ethan wished for something far more precious and elusive, a family that was truly present, truly connected. Little did he know that change was coming, in the form of a distant cousin named David, whose arrival would set in motion a series of events that would shake the very foundations of the Harrington family's carefully constructed world. As the first light of dawn crept over the Beverly Hills skyline, painting the mansions and manicured lawns in hues of gold and pink, a cab pulled up to the imposing gates of the Harrington estate. From it emerged a lanky boy of 12, his clothes well-worn but clean, a single duffel bag slung over his shoulder. This was David, John Harrington's cousin's son, thrust into their world by circumstances beyond his control. David stood for a moment, taking in the sheer size and grandeur of the house before him. It was a far cry from the modest apartment he'd shared with his parents in a small Midwestern town. The memory of his parents, their warm smiles and comforting embraces, sent a pang through his heart. They weren't gone, not really, just away on an extended work assignment overseas. But for David, who had never been apart from them for more than a day or two, it felt like an eternity. As he approached the front door, David squared his shoulders, determined to face whatever lay ahead with the same courage and optimism his parents had always instilled in him. He may not have had wealth, but he had something far more valuable, a heart full of love and a spirit unbroken by hardship. The door swung open before David could even knock, revealing Lily Harrington, her face a mask of polite curiosity, tinged with something that might have been relief. "David," she said, her voice warm but slightly uncertain. "Welcome to our home. Please come in." As David stepped into the cavernous foyer, his eyes widened, taking in the marble floors, the crystal chandelier, the artwork that probably cost more than his entire old neighborhood. It was beautiful, certainly, but there was something cold about it all, a sterility that made him long for the cozy clutter of his parents' apartment. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrington," David said, remembering his manners. "I really appreciate you and Mr. Harrington letting me stay here." Lily's smile softened, becoming more genuine. There was something about David's earnest gratitude that touched her, reminding her of a time when she, too, had been new to this world of wealth and privilege. "Please call me Aunt Lily," she said, leading him towards the grand staircase. "Your family, after all. Let me show you to your room. I hope you'll be comfortable here." As they ascended the stairs, David couldn't help but notice the family portrait hanging in the foyer. His eyes were drawn to the small figure of Ethan, looking lost and alone despite being surrounded by his parents. Something about that image stirred a protective instinct in David, a desire to reach out to this cousin he had yet to meet. The room Lily led him to was larger than the entire living room of his old apartment. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, while a state-of-the-art computer setup occupied another. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the hills and the city beyond. "This is amazing," David breathed, unable to hide his awe. "Thank you, Aunt Lily." Lily smiled, pleased by his reaction. "I'm glad you like it. Ethan's room is just down the hall. He's probably still asleep. He tends to sleep in on weekends. Why don't you get settled, and I'll introduce you to at breakfast." After Lily left, David began unpacking his meager possessions, feeling somewhat out of place among the luxury surrounding him. As he carefully placed a framed photo of his parents on the nightstand, he made a silent promise to them. He would make the most of this opportunity, yes, but he would never forget where he came from or the values they had taught him. Meanwhile, in his own room, Ethan was already awake, had been for hours. He sat by his window, watching as the gardener Miguel began his daily routine in the expansive grounds below. There was something soothing about watching Miguel work, his movements deliberate and purposeful. It was so different from the frantic energy that usually filled the house when his father was home. A soft knock on his door pulled Ethan from his reverie. "Ethan?" His mother's voice drifted through the wood. "Are you awake, sweetheart? David's here." Why don't you come down for breakfast and meet him? Ethan felt a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. He'd heard whispers about David's arrival, had seen his parents discussing it in hushed tones when they thought he wasn't listening. Part of him was excited at the prospect of having someone close to his age around, someone who might understand him. But another part, the part that had grown used to disappointment, feared that David would be just another person who didn't really see him. "Coming, Mom," he called back, his voice barely above a whisper. As Ethan made his way down to the dining room, he could hear voices, his mother's, soft and encouraging, and another unfamiliar one that must belong to David. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped into the room. David looked up as Ethan entered, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Hey," he said, standing up and extending his hand. "You must be Ethan. I'm David. It's great to finally meet you." Ethan hesitated for a moment before shaking David's hand. "Hi," he mumbled, his eyes downcast. But David wasn't deterred by Ethan's shyness. "Your mom tells me you're into video games. Me too. Maybe we could play something together later." For the first time in what felt like forever, a small spark of excitement flared in Ethan's chest. "Really? You want to play with me?" David's smile widened. "Of course. I bet you could teach me a thing or two." As the boys settled into breakfast, chatting about their favorite games and characters, Lily watched from the sidelines, a mix of emotions swirling within her. There was joy at seeing Ethan come out of his shell, even if just a little. But there was also a pang of sadness and guilt. Why had it taken the arrival of a virtual stranger to bring a smile to her son's face? Had she and John really become so distant from their own child? The sound of the front door opening and closing interrupted her thoughts. John strode into the dining room, his attention focused on his smartphone as usual. He glanced up briefly, nodding at David. "Ah, you must be David. Welcome," he said, his tone polite but distracted. "I hope you're settling in well." Before David could respond, John's phone buzzed. "Excuse me, I need to take this," he muttered, already turning away. Ethan's face fell, the brief moment of joy he had experienced fading as quickly as it had come. He slumped in his chair, pushing his breakfast around his plate with disinterest. The familiar ache of invisibility settled over him once more, a heavy blanket of disappointment and longing. David, however, was not so easily deterred. He watched John's retreating back with a mixture of curiosity and concern, then turned his attention back to Ethan. There was something in the younger boy's demeanor that struck a chord deep within David, a loneliness he recognized all too well. "Hey, Ethan," David said, his voice gentle but enthusiastic. "I noticed a really cool garden outside. Do you ever spend time out there?" Ethan looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "The garden? Oh, that's Miguel's domain. He's our gardener." David's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "A gardener? That's awesome. I've always wanted to learn more about gardening. Do you think Miguel would mind if we went out there and took a look around?" For a moment, Ethan hesitated. The garden had always been a place he observed from afar, a green oasis that seemed somehow separate from the cold, sterile world of the mansion. But there was something in David's eager expression that made him want to step out of his comfort zone. I guess we could ask him," Ethan said, a small spark of excitement kindling in his chest. Lily, who had been silently watching this exchange, felt a glimmer of hope. "That sounds like a wonderful idea," she said, her voice warm with encouragement. "Why don't you boys finish your breakfast, and then you can head outside? I'm sure Miguel would be delighted to show you around." As the boys wolfed down their food with newfound enthusiasm, Lily couldn't help but marvel at the change in her son. It was as if David's presence had breathed life into Ethan, awakening a part of him that had long been dormant. Outside, the California sun bathed the expansive grounds in a golden glow. Miguel was kneeling by a flower bed, his weathered hands gently coaxing life from the earth. He looked up as Ethan and David approached, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Ah, young Master Ethan," Miguel said, his voice rich with a slight accent. "It is good to see you out in the sunshine. And who is your friend? David stepped forward, extending his hand. I'm David, sir. Ethan's cousin. I just arrived today. Miguel's smile widened as he shook David's hand. Welcome, David. And please call me Miguel. Sir makes me feel old. He winked, eliciting a small giggle from Ethan. Miguel, David said, his eyes bright with curiosity. Would you mind showing us around the garden? It's so beautiful, and I'd love to learn more about what you do here. Miguel's face lit up with pleasure. It was rare for anyone in the household to take an interest in his work, let alone the children. It would be my honor, he said, rising to his feet. Come, let me show you the wonders that grow here. Text here, the right care, and then to step back and let them grow. Ethan absorbed Miguel's words, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. It was a feeling he couldn't quite name, a mixture of longing and hope and something else, something that felt a lot like understanding. David, noticing the thoughtful look on Ethan's face, nudged him gently. Hey, what do you say we ask Miguel if we can help out in the garden sometimes? It could be fun, and we might even learn something. Ethan's eyes widened at the suggestion. The idea of actually participating, of creating something beautiful with his own hands, was both thrilling and a little scary. But as he looked at David's encouraging smile and Miguel's kind eyes, he felt a surge of courage. Could we? Ethan asked, his voice small but hopeful. I mean, if it's okay with you, Miguel, we wouldn't get in the way, would we? Miguel's face broke into a wide grin. Get in the way? My young friends, you would be doing me a great service. There is always work to be done in a garden, and many hands make light work. Besides, he added with a wink, every gardener needs an apprentice or two. As the boys eagerly agreed to help, making plans to start the very next day, Lily watched from the window of her study. Tears pricked at her eyes as she saw the animation in Ethan's face, the way he gestured excitedly as he talked with David and Miguel. It was as if a light had been switched on inside her son, illuminating a part of him she had feared was lost forever. In that moment, Lily made a decision. She had stood by for too long, watching as her family drifted apart, as the warmth and love she had once dreamed of was replaced by cold efficiency and emotional distance. But no more. Seeing Ethan come alive in the garden, connecting with David and Miguel, had awakened something in her as well, a determination to reclaim the family she knew they could be. As she turned away from the window, her gaze fell on a framed photo on her desk. It was from years ago, when Ethan was just a toddler. In the picture, John was holding him high in the air, both of their faces alight with laughter. Lily's heart clenched at the memory of that day, of the joy and love that had seemed so boundless then. We can have that again, she whispered to herself, her voice thick with emotion but strong with resolve. We will have that again. With newfound purpose, Lily began to plan. She would start small, with family dinners where phones were banned and conversation was encouraged. She would make time each day to really talk with Ethan, to listen to his thoughts and dreams. And John, well, John would be a challenge. But Lily was determined to remind him of the man he used to be, the father who had once looked at their son with such love and pride. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Lily called the boys in for dinner. They came bounding up the path, faces flushed with exertion and excitement, already planning their next gardening adventure. Ethan's eyes were bright, his smile wide and genuine in a way Lily hadn't seen in far too long. "Mom," Ethan called as they approached, "can David and I help Miguel in the garden tomorrow? He said he'd teach us how to plant some new flowers." Lily's heart swelled at the eagerness in her son's voice. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, pulling him into a hug. "That sounds wonderful." As they all headed inside, Lily couldn't help but feel a sense of hope blooming in her chest. It was fragile, like a newly sprouted seedling, but with care and nurturing, she knew it could grow into something beautiful and strong. Little did she know that this small seed of change, planted in the fertile soil of love and connection, would soon grow into a force powerful enough to transform not just Ethan, but the entire Harrington family. The journey ahead would not be easy. But with David's arrival and the wisdom of Miguel's garden, the first steps had been taken on a path towards healing and redemption. As the Harrington household settled into a new routine with David's presence, the dynamics began to shift in subtle but significant ways. Ethan, once withdrawn and silent, now buzzed with excitement each morning, eager to join David in the garden. The two boys had fallen into an easy friendship, bonding over their shared interest in Miguel's horticultural wisdom and the simple joy of working with their hands. For Ethan, the garden became a sanctuary, a place where he felt seen and valued. Miguel's patient guidance and David's unwavering support gave him the confidence to try new things, to make mistakes and learn from them. With each seed planted, each weed pulled, Ethan felt a sense of accomplishment that had been sorely lacking in his life. One sunny afternoon, as the boys were helping Miguel plant a new row of sunflowers, Ethan found himself opening up in a way he never had before. "You know," he said, his voice soft but steady, "I used to think that nothing I did mattered, that I was just invisible." David paused in his digging, looking at his cousin with understanding in his eyes. "I get that," he said. "It's tough feeling like no one sees you. But Ethan, you matter. Look at what you're doing right now. You're helping create something beautiful. That matters." Miguel, overhearing their conversation, knelt down beside them. "David is right, young Ethan," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Every living thing in this garden matters, from the mightiest oak to the tiniest seed. And you, my friend, are no different. You have the power to nurture, to create, to bring joy. Never forget that." Ethan blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the sudden rush of emotion. For so long he had felt adrift, unseen and unheard in his own home. But here, in this patch of earth with soil under his fingernails and the sun warm on his back, he felt grounded. He felt real. As the days passed, the changes in Ethan became more pronounced. He laughed more easily, spoke more confidently, and even began to stand a little taller. Lily watched these transformations with a mixture of joy and bittersweet regret, wondering how she had missed the signs of her son's unhappiness for so long. Determined to nurture this newfound spark in Ethan, Lily began to make changes of her own. She started joining the boys in the garden, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Her designer clothes were replaced with comfortable jeans and t-shirts, her manicured nails soon bearing the badge of honor that was garden soil. One evening, as they all sat around the dinner table, a family dinner now a nightly occurrence rather than a rarity, Lily broached a subject that had been on her mind. "I was thinking," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and nervousness. "What if we expanded the garden? We could create a community space, invite neighbors to participate, maybe even donate some of the produce to local food banks." Ethan's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "That would be amazing, Mom. We could teach other kids about gardening too, like Miguel teaches us." David nodded enthusiastically. "And it would be a great way to give back to the community. My parents always said that true wealth is measured by how much you can give, not how much you have." John, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, looked up from his plate. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Interest, perhaps, or the stirring of long-dormant emotions. "A community garden?" he said, his tone thoughtful. "That's actually not a bad idea. It could be good PR for the company, too, show that we're invested in local initiatives." Lily felt a spark of hope at John's words. It wasn't quite the enthusiastic response she had dreamed of, but it was a start. For the first time in years, John was engaging with a family idea that didn't revolve around business or social status. "I think it's a wonderful idea," Miguel chimed in, his weathered face creased in a warm smile. "Gardens have a way of bringing people together, of healing rifts and nurturing not just plants, but relationships too." As the conversation flowed, filled with excited plans and ideas, Lily couldn't help but marvel at the change in their family dynamic. Ethan was animated, his words tumbling out in a rush of enthusiasm. David offered thoughtful suggestions, his natural leadership abilities shining through. And John, while still reserved, was listening, really listening, in a way he hadn't in years. Later that night, as Lily prepared for bed, she heard a soft knock at the bedroom door. To her surprise, it was John, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Lily," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking about this garden idea. I think, I think I'd like to help. Maybe I could use some of my business contacts to get donations for supplies, or to spread the word about the project." Lily felt her heart swell with a mixture of love and cautious hope. "John, that would be wonderful," she said softly. "I think it would mean a lot to Ethan, too, to have you involved." A flicker of pain crossed John's face at the mention of their son. "I've been a fool, haven't I?" he said, more to himself than to Lily. "I've been so focused on providing for our family that I forgot to actually be present for it." Lily reached out, taking John's hand in hers. "It's not too late," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We can change, John. We can be the family we were always meant to be." As they stood there, hand in hand, Lily felt as if they were on the precipice of something monumental. Like the seeds in their garden, the potential for growth and renewal was there, waiting to be nurtured. The next morning dawned bright and clear, full of promise. As Ethan and David bounded down the stairs, ready for another day of gardening adventures, they were met with an unexpected sight. John, dressed in casual clothes that hadn't seen the light of day in years, was waiting for them. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice a mix of surprise and tentative hope, "what are you doing here? Don't you have work?" John knelt down, meeting his son's eyes. "Work can wait," he said softly. I thought maybe I could join you boys in the garden today, if that's okay with you." The smile that broke across Ethan's face was like the sun emerging from behind a cloud, brilliant and warm. "Really? You want to garden with us?" "Really," John affirmed, his own smile a bit rusty but genuine. "I think it's time I learned what all the fuss is about. Plus," he added with a wink, "someone needs to make sure you boys don't turn our backyard into a jungle." As they all headed out to the garden, Miguel watching with knowing eyes and a gentle smile, there was a sense of a new beginning. The Harrington family still had a long way to go, many conversations to have and wounds to heal. But here, in this moment, with their hands in the soil and the California sun warm on their backs, they were taking the first steps on a journey of growth and reconnection. And as Ethan looked around at his family, his mom's eyes bright with happiness, his dad's face softened with a newfound joy, David's encouraging grin, and Miguel's wise, kind gaze, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long, long time. The warmth of belonging, the unshakable knowledge that he was seen, heard, and loved. In the fertile soil of their garden, not only were plants taking root and flourishing, but so too was the Harrington family, growing stronger and more vibrant with each passing day. As the weeks turned into months, the Harrington estate underwent a transformation that was both physical and emotional. The once manicured lawns gave way to thriving vegetable patches, vibrant flower beds, and winding paths that invited exploration. But more importantly, the cold, empty spaces within the family began to fill with warmth, laughter, and genuine connection. The Community Garden Project, born from Lily's suggestion and nurtured by the entire family's efforts, blossomed into something far greater than any of them had imagined. What started as a simple idea to give back to the community became a catalyst for change, not just for the Harringtons, but for the entire neighborhood. Every weekend, the gates of the Harrington estate, once symbols of exclusivity and isolation, were thrown open, welcoming neighbors, volunteers, and curious passers-by. The garden became a hub of activity, a place where people from all walks of life came together to plant, nurture, and harvest. Ethan, once a shy and withdrawn child, blossomed in this new environment. He took on the role of a young teacher, eagerly sharing the knowledge he had gained from Miguel with other children who visited the garden. His eyes shone with pride as he explained the difference between annual and perennial plants, or demonstrated the proper way to water seedlings. David, too, found his place in this new world. His natural leadership abilities came to the fore as he helped organize volunteer schedules and coordinate with local food banks to distribute the garden's abundant produce. He had a gift for bringing people together, for finding common ground even among the most diverse groups. John Harrington, perhaps, underwent the most dramatic transformation. The man who had once measured his worth solely by the size of his bank account now found a different kind of wealth in the soil of his garden. He still worked hard, but his priorities had shifted. Instead of chasing the next big deal, he poured his energy into expanding the community garden project, using his business acumen to secure grants and donations. One sunny Saturday afternoon, as the garden buzzed with activity, John found himself working alongside a young single mother who had recently lost her job. As they planted tomatoes together, she opened up about her struggles, her fears for her children's future. John listened, really listened, in a way he never would have before. And when she finished speaking, he didn't offer empty platitudes or throw money at the problem. Instead, he said, "You know, my company has a job opening in our community outreach department. Someone with your experience and passion would be perfect for it. What do you say we discuss it over coffee next week?" The woman's eyes filled with tears of gratitude, and John felt a warmth in his chest that no business deal had ever provided. He glanced across the garden, catching Ethan's eye. His son gave him a thumbs up and a wide grin, and John felt a surge of pride, not in his own actions, but in the amazing young man his son was becoming. Lily, watching this interaction from nearby, felt her heart swell with love and pride. She had always known, somewhere deep inside, that John was capable of this kind of compassion. Seeing it in action, seeing the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago re-emerge, was like watching a garden come to life after a long winter. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Miguel gathered everyone around the large oak tree at the center of the property. His weathered face was creased in a wide smile as he looked out at the diverse group of people: children with dirt-smudged faces, elderly couples holding hands, teenagers who had traded their smartphones for gardening gloves. "Friends," Miguel began, his voice carrying easily over the crowd, "look around you. See what we have created together. This garden is more than just plants and soil. It is a symbol of what can happen when we open our hearts, when we nurture not just the earth, but each other." He paused, his eyes finding Ethan and David in the crowd. "We all have the power to create beauty, to foster growth. Sometimes it takes a child to remind us of this truth, to show us that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought or sold, but must be cultivated with love, patience, and care." As Miguel spoke, Ethan felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see his father standing beside him, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm so proud of you, son," John whispered. "You've taught me more than I could ever have imagined." Ethan leaned into his father's side, a sense of peace and belonging washing over him. He caught David's eye, and the two boys shared a smile of understanding. They had both found a home here, in this garden, and in this family that had grown to encompass so much more than just blood relations. As the gathering dispersed, people lingering to chat and make plans for the next week's activities, the Harrington family found themselves alone under the old oak tree. John looked at each of them in turn. Lily, her face glowing with happiness. Ethan, standing tall and confident. David, whose presence had been the catalyst for so much change. "I think," John said slowly, "it's time we made some changes to that old family portrait in the foyer. What do you say we get a new one done? Right here, in the garden." Lily's eyes widened in surprise and joy. "Oh, John, that's a wonderful idea. But," she hesitated, glancing at David. John understood immediately. "David," he said, turning to the boy who had become like a second son to him, "we'd be honored if you'd be in the portrait too. You're part of this family now in every way that matters." David felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by emotion. I'd like that very much," he managed to say. As they stood there, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, Miguel approached, a knowing smile on his face. "Perhaps," he suggested gently, "we could make it more than just a family portrait. Perhaps it could be a community portrait, with all of us who have found a home in this garden." The idea was met with enthusiastic agreement, and plans were quickly made. The following weekend, the garden was filled with people, all gathered around the old oak tree. Professional photographers mingled with amateur enthusiasts, capturing not just posed shots, but candid moments of laughter, work, and connection. The resulting image, which would soon hang in pride of place in the Harrington foyer, was a testament to the transformative power of love, community, and nature. In the center stood the Harrington family, John, Lily, Ethan, and David, surrounded by a diverse group of smiling faces. Miguel stood to one side, his weathered hands resting on a gardening tool, his eyes twinkling with joy and wisdom. But it was more than just a photograph. It was a snapshot of a journey, a visual representation of how one family's healing had rippled outward, touching countless lives. It showed a community brought together by shared purpose and mutual care, proving that the most beautiful gardens are those that nurture not just plants, but people. As Ethan stood in the foyer weeks later, gazing up at the new portrait, he felt a sense of wonder and gratitude wash over him. He thought back to the lonely boy he had been, feeling invisible and unimportant. That boy seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by someone who knew his worth, who understood the power of connection and the joy of nurturing life. David came to stand beside him, and the two boys shared a look of understanding. They had both found something here that they never knew they were missing, a sense of belonging, of purpose, of family in its truest and most expansive sense. From the garden outside came the sound of laughter and cheerful conversation. John and Lily's voices mingled with those of their neighbors, discussing plans for expanding the community garden project to other neighborhoods. Miguel's gentle instructions to a group of eager young learners drifted through an open window. Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the California sun. He knew now that he was not invisible, that he had never been invisible. He had always had the power to create beauty, to foster growth, to make a difference. It had just taken a garden, a wise old man, and a cousin who became a brother to help him see it. As he turned to join his family and friends in the garden, Ethan paused for one last look at the portrait. It was more than just an image. It was a promise. A promise to always remember the lessons learned in soil and sunlight, to nurture the connections that truly matter, and to never forget that the most precious things in life are not things at all, but the love we cultivate and the lives we touch. With a heart full of joy and purpose, Ethan stepped out into the sunlight, ready to continue growing, learning, and blooming. Just like the garden that had saved not just his family, but an entire community. And so, the story of the boy who saved a family came full circle. But it wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning. For Ethan, for the Harringtons, and for all those whose lives had been touched by a simple garden and the love that bloomed there, it was the start of a lifelong journey of growth, connection, and the endless possibilities that come when we open our hearts and nurture the beauty within ourselves and others.